Hello varlets, welcome back to another video. This one, as you can see, is a follow-up from my previous Graia Vigilant Autogun build theory video. And from the beginning clips, it's still hitting really hard despite making some very key adjustments to make it Havoc-Worthy viable, which because I'm making this video, I have succeeded. Now initially, I was going to leave the build theory video as it is, leaving the last ending kind of up in the air to see whether it works or not. But I couldn't help but wonder if I was correct. And so I decided to iterate on the build and bring it out to actual games to kind of figure out whether more adjustments needed to be made. And surprise, I was half correct. Half of it made sense in theory, but the other half of it required a shift in perspective on how I approach build crafting for this weapon specifically. And this video is going to revolve around the logic behind that. So if you like to hear me explain how and why I make certain choices when it comes to shifting a build, making it Havoc-Worthy viable when it was previously struggling, then you can continue watching on. But if you just want to know what the gist of the build is, there is going to be a link in the description below. So you can look at that if you just don't want to hear me ramble about how I get the build together. And all of this is going to stem because of one key change to the Vigilant Autogun. So just to get everyone on the same page first, in case you haven't watched the build theory video, this build has a loadout of the Arc Maul with this configuration of perks and blessings. I've got 2 stamina, carapace damage, thunderous, and execution. And we have a Graia Vigilant Autogun that is kitted out with damage against Flak and Maniac, as well as opening salvo and deadly accurate. So with this configuration, I've stated in my previous video, is the maximum damage output because of deadly accurate. Now, the key change that shifted the entire build and made it Havoc-Worthy viable was moving away from deadly accurate. In fact, I removed deadly accurate and replaced it with ghost. This blessing alone shifted how I wanted to approach the build and how the entire talent, well, not the entire talent tree, but most of the talent tree's direction would change. So we're going to dive into that now with this idea in mind. So the reason I've picked ghost is because this is a very good pairing with ACD. Since you are almost always going to be landing headshots, the ability to be immune to ranged attacks while you're doing it is incredibly powerful. This allows you to do your job as an anti-shooter without fearing of getting shot down. In some of my Auric level games, I was getting absolutely murdered by shotgunners because I could not hold my ground long enough to take them down. This is usually the case when there are like 6 or 12 of them appearing at once, which is quite normal even in lower Havocs. So Ghost allowed me to basically ignore their aggression and then snipe them down one at a time. And this is where everything starts to change. So let me bring you to the talent tree to see how that shifts. Now, this is the original theory crafted talent tree that I left in the last video. The idea was that we would take the Artificer Servo Skull along with Noospheric Command, and when you pair it with this version of the Arc Maul, you could deal with Crushers quite easily. So, let me just spawn a Crusher to demonstrate. Here we go. Ordinarily, if you're just trying to fight the Crusher on your own, it's going to take a while, right? Because this weapon isn't built for dealing with anti-armor so effectively. But with Noospheric Command and using the Empowered Hit, just hitting it once and tagging allows you to shred the Crusher's armor really fast because you applied so much brittleness to it. So this is really helpful when you're dealing with, let's say, a bunch of Crushers. So that change alone made it very resilient against hordes of like Maulers and Ragers in the higher Havocs, which I liked. The rest of the configuration comes from the idea that we are going to play a lot more defensively so that we can do our job. And that involves removing a bunch of talents. So I'm going to remove Retribution Conduit because this talent isn't as effective as it should be because of the way we are using ACD and the role of the Arc Maul. We're also going to reconfigure how we approach Noospheric Command. Because we no longer need crit, means we no longer need Last Stand Relay, and we don't have to depend on Flux Conduit build-up either. This also meant that we could free up Adaptive Combat Calibration as well. So we had 7 talents to free from this side alone and from the top. And we also didn't need Piercing Sight anymore. Because we weren't playing with crit chance, we didn't need the crit damage from this node either. So what that ultimately meant was that almost a quarter of our talent points could be reassigned to be more defensive, which is what this build needed to be. So the starters was that we would take up this route to get Noospheric Command. We would pick up Power Redistribution Uplink. This is mainly for the toughness damage reduction, and although we aren't playing with crits anymore, we were still using Flensing Protocol, which means we still had an okay crit chance, but this would be helpful in keeping us alive a little bit longer. We then pick up Residual Current Buffer. This gives us a permanent 10% toughness damage reduction, which would add up with the rest of our defensive capabilities, and then we would enter Noospheric Command via Channeled Motive Force. So this was a very good change. The other 3 talent points then needed to be reassigned somewhere else. So I actually wanted to go the route of progressive plating matrix. This would give us 15% toughness damage reduction, which was really easy to maintain in melee combat. And we will remove force distribution actuators because we would then depend on our arc flash and Nospheric command to deal with things like maulers and ragers. This also meant we could free up sustained assault doctrine and pick up adaptive combat engrams to free up a talent point here. So now you can see I have 4 talent points instead of 3, but I do lose on some of my melee damage, which was not too bad. With these 4 talent points, we could then bridge the gap to the upper part here via Threat Detection Imperative and Mobian Conductor. This gave us another 20% toughness damage reduction, which was stacked up with Progressive Plating Matrix, Power Redistribution Uplink, and Residual Current Buffer. And so we would have around 75% toughness damage reduction, which was a lot for this build, much more higher than we had initially. And that meant we were significantly more survivable than we started with. The other 2 talent points were then allocated into ACD's Calculated Priority. This gave us the extra damage ramp up that we needed to reach the 2-shot breakpoint against Ragers, and Restoration Protocol. This node alone meant that we were very, very safe from ranged chip damage combined with the rest of our toughness damage reduction. Because if you were busy actively shooting enemies with ACD, then you would be immune to range damage anyway, thanks to Ghosts. But the period where you would be vulnerable is when you are reloading. Now, the good news is that when you're reloading, you don't consume any more duration for ACD, but Restoration Protocol is still ticking. That means you are still regenerating at least 10% toughness per second, even if you're getting shot. And that meant you were much more resilient in taking chip damage, even if you couldn't fire back. This would then stack with Auto Repair Doctrines for a total of 13% toughness per second, on top of your Resurgence flat coherency toughness regeneration, as well as all of the damage being mitigated by all the toughness damage reduction that you've added in. This would then become the new build that would perform pretty well on Havoc-Worthy, and I was very surprised because I had removed quite a bit of damage, especially from Sustained Assault Doctrine, in order to get more defense, and it turned out that that was the right call. Now, if you're playing against Blight, or you just really don't want to deal with Tox Bombers, you can remove Weakness Analysis Doctrine and take Ablative Wards instead. This will basically make Tox Bombers, Blight a non-factor in your game, and it's really, really good because it allowed me to maintain a front line even though I was technically designed for range. So this was a very good change that allowed me to play on Havoc-Worthy quite comfortably as well. Oh, slight correction. You can actually remove Servo Core Recharge Engine because you're connected via Auto Repair Doctrine anyway. So you can actually take up Weakness Analysis Doctrine again. And this is good because this is essentially a permanent 10% damage thanks to Artificer Servo Skull. So yeah, this is the more finalized build I am using with the Graia Vigilant Autogun. Again, if you want to see the whole thing, you can look at the Games Lantern link. But this one performed significantly better, and I'm glad I actually followed through on my build theory to put this build together. So give this build a whirl, let me know what you think, and hopefully you found this video interesting as I break down my thoughts on how to adjust a build that was previously only Auric-worthy into something that could perform quite decently on Havoc-Worthy. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next one, Varlets.